After a month on an offshore rig, Mike returns home to his family, expecting a warm welcome. Instead, he uncovers a web of lies that shatters his world. A shocking betrayal by his wife and best friend sparks a calculated plan for justice. Will Mike reclaim his life, or will the truth destroy everything he loves? Buckle up for a story of heartbreak, revenge, and redemption that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Mike Torres eased his pickup truck into the driveway of his Corpus Christi home, the engine's low rumble fading into the quiet Texas evening. The salty tang of the Gulf of Mexico clung to his skin, a stubborn reminder of the past 28 days spent on an offshore oil rig. His duffel bag, heavy with the weight of a month's worth of clothes and gear, thudded against his shoulder as he climbed out. At 38, Mike's body bore the toll of long shifts in blistering heat and pounding storms, but his heart carried a different kind of ache. He'd missed his daughters, Sophia and Isabella, and his wife, Elena. The thought of their smiles had kept him going through endless nights on the rig. He paused at the front door, hand hovering over the knob. Coming home always stirred a mix of relief and unease, like stepping onto a stage where the script had changed without his knowledge. Mike was the guy everyone in the neighborhood counted on, fixing a neighbor's fence, coaching Little League, always ready with a cold beer and a laugh. But tonight, something felt off, a subtle shift in the air he couldn't pin down. He pushed the door open, and the rich aroma of Elena's Tex-Mex chili hit him, warm and inviting, pulling him toward the kitchen. Elena stood at the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon, her movements quick and precise. The sizzle of onions and beef filled the space, a familiar rhythm from years of homecomings. Mike dropped his bag by the couch and cleared his throat. Elena turned, her eyes flickering with a fleeting surprise before settling into a wide smile. "You're back early," she said, her voice bright but edged with something unsteady, like a note held too long. "Caught a red-eye flight," Mike replied, stepping closer. He expected the usual, a long hug, her arms tight around him, maybe a soft, "I missed you," whispered against his ear. Instead, Elena wiped her hands on a dish towel, leaned in for a quick peck, and turned back to the stove. The kiss felt like a checkbox ticked, not a reunion. Mike's stomach twisted, but he brushed it off. Exhaustion, he told himself. Just the grind of the rig catching up. "Where are the girls?" he asked, glancing toward the hallway. The house was too quiet, missing the usual chaos of Sophia's music or Isabella's laughter. Sophia's upstairs, probably texting her friends. Isabella's doing homework. Or, also on her phone, Elena said with a small laugh, but her eyes stayed on the pot, avoiding his gaze. Mike chuckled, trying to lighten the moment, but the sound felt hollow. He grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, the cold glass grounding him as he leaned against the counter. "How's everything been here?" "All good?" he asked, watching her closely. Elena nodded, her spoon pausing for a split second. "Yeah, just the usual." The words came too fast, like a line rehearsed one too many times. Mike's jaw tightened. He'd spent weeks surrounded by the same faces on the rig, reading tension in a glance, knowing when someone was hiding something. Elena's answer didn't sit right, but he let it slide for now, filing it away in his mind. "Dinner's almost ready," Elena said, turning to grab a spice jar. Her phone buzzed on the counter, screen lighting up. Mike's eyes flicked to it instinctively, catching a name, Carlos, before she snatched it up and flipped it face down. Carlos, his best friend since high school, the guy who'd stood by him at his wedding, who'd shared countless barbecues in this very backyard. The move was quick, casual, but it sent a jolt through Mike's chest. He sipped his water, pretending not to notice, but his mind was already racing. "Smells amazing," he said, forcing a grin. "You outdid yourself." Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just wanted to make tonight special," she said, turning back to the stove. Mike nodded, his grip tightening on the bottle. "Special." The word echoed, but not in the way it used to. Sophia bounded down the stairs first, phone in hand, thumbs flying across the screen. At 16, she was all energy, her ponytail swinging as she slid into a chair. "Hey, Dad," she said, barely looking up, her voice flat. Mike's heart sank. He remembered when she'd run to him, arms wide, the moment he walked through the door. Now, her attention was glued to her phone, a wall between them. Isabella appeared next, yawning as she shuffled to the table. At 14, she had a quieter presence, her dark eyes catching Mike's with a small smile. "You're finally back," she said, grabbing a tortilla chip from a bowl. The warmth in her voice gave Mike a flicker of hope, but even that felt fragile, like it could slip away if he didn't hold on tight. Dinner was served. the table set with steaming bowls of chili and a basket of warm cornbread. Mike tried to spark conversation, asking about school, soccer practice, the latest drama with their friends. Sophia's answers were short, clipped, her eyes darting to her phone. Isabella offered a bit more, mentioning a science project, but even she seemed distracted. Elena filled the silence with small talk about the weather and a new coffee shop downtown, her words feeling like a buffer against something unspoken. Mike ate slowly, watching his family. The chili was perfect, spicy and rich, but it couldn't mask the tension settling over the table like an uninvited guest. He'd spent years working brutal hours on the rig, enduring isolation and exhaustion to give them this life. A nice house, new cars, summer trips to South Padre Island. He'd told himself it was worth it, that his absence was a sacrifice for their future. But sitting here, with his daughters barely meeting his eyes and Elena's smile feeling like a mask, he wondered if he'd been wrong. After dinner, Mike grabbed a beer and sank onto the couch, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The TV flickered with a muted baseball game, but his mind was elsewhere. He spun the bottle in his hands, the cold glass a small anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Something was wrong in this house, something deeper than teenage moods or his own fatigue. Elena cleared the dishes in the kitchen, her movements quick, almost nervous. When she glanced at him, her smile was tight, practiced, like she was playing a role. Mike took a long pull from his beer, his eyes narrowing. He'd faced rough seas and tougher men on the rig, always trusting his gut to guide him. Now, that same instinct was screaming that the life he'd built was unraveling. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stay in the dark. Mike Torres woke to the faint clink of dishes from the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the Corpus Christi house. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying the previous night's dinner. The way Elena's smile faltered, the quick flip of her phone to hide the screen, the name Carlos flashing briefly. At 38, Mike was used to reading tension on the oil rig, where a single misstep could mean disaster. Now, that same instinct gnawed at him in his own home. He rolled out of bed, muscles stiff from weeks of grueling shifts, and headed downstairs, determined to shake off the unease. Elena was at the counter, pouring coffee into a mug, her phone tucked close beside her. When she noticed Mike, she slid it into her pocket with a swift motion, her lips curving into a smile that felt too polished. "Morning," she said, handing him a mug. "Sleep okay?" Like a rock, Mike lied, taking the coffee. He studied her for a moment, noting the way her fingers lingered near her pocket, as if guarding something. The air between them felt charged, like the calm before a Gulf storm. He sipped the coffee, its bitterness mirroring the doubt settling in his gut. "Girls still asleep?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Teenagers," Elena said with a light laugh, turning to rinse a plate. "They'll probably sleep till noon." Her voice was casual, but Mike caught the slight hesitation, the way her shoulders tensed. He nodded, keeping his expression neutral, but his mind was already piecing things together. After breakfast, Mike headed outside to check the mailbox, hoping the routine would clear his head. The coastal breeze carried the faint hum of lawnmowers from the neighborhood. As he sifted through bills, Mr. Rivera, the retired mechanic next door, waved from his porch. "Good to have you back, Mike," he called, ambling over. "Thought you were still out on the rig." Mike frowned, closing the mailbox. "Got back yesterday." "Why?" Rivera shrugged, scratching his graying beard. "Saw Elena's car pulling in late a couple nights this week. Figured you were still offshore." His tone was offhand, but the words hit Mike like a rogue wave. "Late nights?" Elena hadn't mentioned anything about being out. "Probably just errands," Mike said, forcing a grin. "You know how she is, always running around." Rivera nodded, but his eyes lingered, as if he sensed more. Mike's pulse quickened as he walked back inside, Rivera's comment looping in his mind. He found Elena in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, then quickly locked the screen, setting it face down on the couch. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice a touch too bright. "Yeah, just catching up with Rivera," Mike said, watching her reaction. Her fingers twitched, but she nodded and turned back to her phone. The gesture was small, but it fueled the suspicion growing inside him. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to wait for them to fall into his lap. That night, after Elena went to bed, Mike sat on the couch, the house silent except for the hum of the AC. His heart pounded as he picked up Elena's phone from the kitchen counter where she'd left it charging. He'd never done this before. Snooping felt wrong, a betrayal of the trust he'd always given her. But the weight of doubt was heavier. He punched in her passcode, the same one she'd used for years, their anniversary, and the screen unlocked. The Messages app was open, And there it was, a thread with Carlos, his best friend, the guy who'd toasted at their wedding, who'd helped him fix his truck last summer. Mike's throat tightened as he scrolled. The texts weren't innocent. "Miss you already," Elena had written 2 days ago. "Can't wait for Thursday," Carlos replied, followed by a heart emoji. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, spanning months, late-night meetups, inside jokes, words too intimate for a married woman and another man. Mike's hands shook, his breath shallow. Then one message stopped him cold. He'll never know about Isabella. Isabella, his youngest daughter, the 14-year-old who still hugged him when he came home, who wrote him letters when he was offshore. The words burned into his mind. Was Elena hiding something bigger than an affair? The thought made his chest ache, a mix of rage and dread. He set the phone down exactly as he'd found it, his mind racing. He couldn't confront her yet, not without knowing the full truth. The next morning, Mike played the part of the oblivious husband, joking with Sophia and Isabella over pancakes, asking about their weekend plans. Sophia, 16 and glued to her phone, mumbled about a school dance. Isabella mentioned a new book she was reading, her voice soft but earnest. Mike's heart twisted as he looked at her, searching for answers in her innocent smile. Could she not be his? The question felt like a knife, but he kept his face steady, laughing at her story about a clumsy science teacher. Later, alone in the garage, Mike pulled out his phone and searched for DNA testing labs. His fingers hesitated over the screen, but he booked an express test, paying extra for fast results. He'd need samples, hair, a toothbrush, something discreet. The thought of doubting his daughter's paternity made him sick, but he had to know. He couldn't live with the uncertainty. Over the next few days, Mike became a silent observer in his own home. He noticed Elena's habits, the way she'd step outside to take calls, her quick glances at her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. He caught her texting in the car while waiting to pick up Isabella from soccer, her thumbs moving fast, a secretive smile on her lips. Each moment added fuel to his suspicion, but he held back, waiting for the right moment. One evening, as he helped Isabella with her math homework, he gently tugged a strand of her hair, tucking it into a plastic bag when she wasn't looking. The next day, he did the same with Sophia's hairbrush while she was at school. Sending the samples to the lab felt like mailing a piece of his soul, but he did it, the envelope sealed with a weight he couldn't shake. As he drove back from the post office, Mike passed Carlos's auto shop, its neon sign glowing in the dusk. Carlos, the guy he'd trusted with his life, who'd stood by him through thick and thin. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected, not just from Elena, but from a friend he'd called family. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Whatever the lab results showed, Mike knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this slide. He'd spent years sacrificing for his family, braving the rig's isolation to give them everything. If Elena and Carlos thought they could play him for a fool, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Mike Torres gripped his coffee mug at the kitchen counter, the steam rising in the early Corpus Christi morning. The past week had been a tightrope walk, each day a calculated act of normalcy, while his mind churned with the secrets he'd uncovered on Elena's phone. The messages between his wife and Carlos, his lifelong friend, burned in his memory. Intimate words, clandestine plans, and that haunting line about Isabella, he'll never know. The DNA test results were still pending, and the wait was a slow torture, each tick of the clock amplifying his dread. Mike had faced rough seas on the oil rig, but this uncertainty was a different kind of storm, one that threatened to rip apart everything he'd built. Elena bustled around the kitchen, prepping for their 15th wedding anniversary party that evening. She hummed softly, arranging a tray of jalapeno poppers, acting the part of a devoted wife. Mike watched her, his face a mask of calm, but his pulse thrummed with purpose. The party was his chance, not just to celebrate a milestone, but to expose the truth. He'd spent days planning, his anger sharpening into a precise tool. He wasn't the type to lash out blindly. He wanted justice, and he wanted it to sting. "Need help with anything?" Mike asked, setting his mug down. His voice was steady, betraying none of the fire inside. Elena glanced over, her hands pausing over a stack of napkins. "Just keep the girls out of the kitchen," she said with a quick smile. "They'll eat all the appetizers before the guests arrive." Her tone was light, but Mike caught the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she avoided lingering on his gaze. He nodded, playing along, but his mind was already 3 steps ahead. Sophia and Isabella were upstairs, their voices drifting through the house. Sophia laughing at something on her phone, Isabella practicing lines for a school play. Mike climbed the stairs, knocking on Sophia's door. She opened it, earbuds dangling, and gave him a half-hearted wave. "What's up, Dad?" Just checking in, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Excited for tonight? She shrugged, scrolling through her phone. It's just a bunch of old people eating snacks. Mike forced a chuckle, but her distance stung. He moved to Isabella's room, where she was pacing, script in hand. You'll crush that play, kiddo, he said, ruffling her hair. She grinned, but the moment felt fragile, overshadowed by the question gnawing at him. Was she his? The lab had promised results by noon, and as the clock neared 11:45, Mike's phone buzzed with an email. He slipped into the garage, the hum of the freezer masking his heavy breathing as he opened the message. The words hit like a punch. Sophia was his biological daughter, but Isabella was not. The confirmation of Elena's betrayal and the lie about Isabella's paternity sent a surge of rage through him. He clenched his fists, steadying himself. This wasn't the end, it was the spark. By evening, the house buzzed with guests, neighbors, co-workers, and Carlos, who arrived with a bottle of tequila and a grin that made Mike's blood boil. The backyard was set with string lights, a table laden with tacos and guacamole, and a playlist of classic rock humming through speakers. Elena moved through the crowd, laughing, her charm on full display. Mike played his role, clinking glasses, joking with old friends, but his eyes never left her. He'd uploaded the incriminating texts to a cloud drive, ready to cast onto the living room TV. As dessert was served, Tres Leches cake sliced on the patio. Mike raised his glass, his voice cutting through the chatter. Everyone, I've got something special to share, he said, his tone warm but firm. Elena beamed, oblivious, as guests turned toward him. Mike connected his phone to the TV, the screen flickering to life inside. A little tribute to our marriage, he added, locking eyes with Elena. He pressed play, and the room fell silent as text messages filled the screen. Elena's words to Carlos, flirtatious, secretive, damning, scrolled for all to see. Miss you already, one read. He's clueless, another. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena's face drained of color, her glass slipping to the patio, shattering on the concrete. Mike, what are you? She stammered, her voice breaking. Mike's gaze was steel. I'm showing everyone who you really are, he said, his voice low but clear. He swiped to the DNA results, the screen displaying the truth about Isabella's paternity. And by the way, Isabella isn't mine. You lied to me for 14 years. The words landed like a thunderclap. Sophia's jaw dropped, her eyes darting to her mother. Isabella, standing near the dessert table, froze, her hands trembling. Carlos pushed through the crowd, heading for the gate, but Mike's voice stopped him. Running already? He said, his tone sharp. Carlos didn't respond, his footsteps quickening as he vanished into the night. Elena sank to her knees, tears streaming, her voice a desperate whisper. Mike, please, let's talk. We can fix this. There's no fixing this, Mike said, his voice cold. He pulled a folder from the table, divorce papers, prepared by his lawyer days ago, and set them in front of her. You'll hear from my attorney. The guests stood in stunned silence, some whispering, others slipping away, the party dissolving into chaos. Mike turned to Sophia, who was shaking, tears in her eyes. Dad, how could she whispered. He wanted to comfort her, but his own heart was breaking. Isabella ran inside, her sobs echoing down the hall. Mike's chest tightened. He loved her, blood or not, but the truth had shattered everything. He'd exposed Elena's lies, but the cost was a family in pieces, and he wasn't sure yet if he could pick them up. The Corpus Christi night was thick with the hum of cicadas as Mike Torres sat in his pickup truck, the engine off, the silence heavy. The anniversary party had imploded hours ago, its wreckage still vivid. Elena's shattered glass on the patio, the stunned faces of guests, Sophia's tearful shock, and Isabella's anguished retreat to her room. Mike had exposed his wife's affair with Carlos and the gut-wrenching truth about Isabella's paternity, but victory felt hollow. His hands gripped the steering wheel, the leather creaking under his calloused fingers. He'd planned every move, yet the aftermath left him adrift, like a rig worker lost in a squall. Mike drove to a small apartment he'd rented across town, a temporary refuge from the chaos. The divorce papers he'd served Elena were just the start. His lawyer had already frozen their joint accounts, ensuring she couldn't touch the savings he'd earned through years of grueling shifts. He wasn't after revenge for its own sake. He wanted accountability, a line drawn in the sand. But as he tossed his duffel bag onto the bare mattress, doubts crept in. Had he gone too far, airing their secrets in front of everyone? And Isabella? How could he face her, knowing she wasn't his by blood? The next morning, Sophia showed up at the apartment, her backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes red from crying. "I can't stay with Mom," she said, her voice raw. "Not after what she did." Mike pulled her into a hug, her trembling frame reminding him of when she was little, clinging to him during thunderstorms. He set up a cot for her in the cramped living room, promising they'd figure things out. Sophia's loyalty was a lifeline, but it didn't ease the ache for Isabella, who hadn't answered his texts since the party. Elena's messages flooded his phone, pleas for forgiveness, promises to explain, voice memos thick with sobs. Mike deleted them without listening. He'd trusted her for 15 years, built a life around her, only to learn it was a facade. Carlos, too, had vanished, his auto shop shuttered, his number disconnected. Word spread fast in their tight-knit community. Neighbors whispered about the scandal, and Carlos's name became a cautionary tale. Mike felt no satisfaction, only a dull anger that neither Elena nor Carlos had faced him directly. Days bled into weeks, each one a test of Mike's resolve. He threw himself into routine. Early mornings at a local construction site, a job he'd taken to stay close to home. The physical labor grounded him, the rhythm of hammering nails a stark contrast to the emotional storm. But every quiet moment brought questions. Had his years on the rig, missing school plays and soccer games, pushed Elena away? Or had she always been capable of this deception? The DNA results haunted him. Isabella, his bright, kind-hearted daughter, wasn't his biologically, but every memory of her felt like his own. One afternoon, Mike stopped by the high school to pick up Sophia after her dance practice. She slid into the truck, her usual chatter subdued. "Have you talked to Isabella?" she asked, staring out the window. Mike shook his head, his throat tight. "She's not ready," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was convincing. Sophia sighed. "She's hurting, Dad. She thinks you don't want her anymore." The words cut deep. Mike had spent years on the rig to give his girls everything: college funds, beach vacations, a house with a big backyard. Now he wondered if those sacrifices had cost him something irreplaceable. He drove to a nearby park, needing air, and sat on a bench, watching kids play soccer. The sight reminded him of Isabella's games, how she'd beam when he cheered her on. Blood or not, she was his daughter in every way that mattered. But how could he prove that to her? Elena called a meeting at a neutral spot, a coffee shop downtown. Mike agreed, not for her sake, but to discuss the girls. She sat across from him, stirring her latte, her voice low. "I messed up, Mike. I know I can't undo it, but I want to make things right for Sophia and Isabella." Mike leaned back, arms crossed. "You lied about Isabella's father for 14 years. You slept with my best friend. What's there to make right?" Elena flinched, her eyes glistening, but Mike felt no pity. She'd made her choices. The divorce moved forward swiftly. Mike's lawyer ensured he kept the house and most of their assets, leaving Elena with a small settlement and her car. She moved into an apartment across town, her reputation in tatters. Sophia refused to visit her, still angry, but Isabella split her time, torn between loyalty to her mother and confusion about Mike. He sent Isabella texts daily, simple things like, "Proud of you," or "Heard you ace that science quiz," hoping to keep their connection alive. Her replies were short, hesitant, but they came. One evening, Mike found a letter in his mailbox, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Carlos, brief and cowardly. "I'm sorry. I'm leaving town. You deserved better." Mike crumpled it, tossing it into the trash. Apologies couldn't erase years of betrayal. He sat on the apartment's small balcony, the Gulf breeze carrying the faint salt of the sea. He'd won. Elena and Carlos were exposed, his financial future secure, but the victory felt empty. His family was fractured, and Isabella's silence weighed heavier than any rig shift. Mike knew the next step wasn't about Elena or Carlos. It was about his daughters, especially Isabella. He'd fought for truth, but now he had to fight for something harder: rebuilding trust. He pulled out his phone, typing a new message to Isabella. "Can we talk? Just you and me. Whenever you're ready." He hit send, his heart heavy but resolute. The road ahead was uncertain, but he wasn't giving up. Not on her, not on their family, no matter how broken it seemed. Mike Torres stood outside Elena's new apartment in Corpus Christi, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Weeks had passed since the anniversary party where he'd exposed Elena's affair with Carlos and the shattering truth about Isabella's paternity. The divorce was finalized, the house and most assets secured in Mike's name, leaving Elena with a modest settlement. Sophia had moved in with him, her loyalty unwavering, but Isabella remained distant, caught between her mother's regret and her own confusion. Mike's new job at a local construction site kept him grounded, but every quiet moment brought the same question. Could he rebuild what was left of his family? He'd sent Isabella countless texts, small gestures to keep their bond alive. Congratulations on her soccer goal, a reminder to study for her history test. Her responses were brief, cautious, like she was testing the waters. Today, he'd asked to meet her here, just the two of them. His palms were sweaty as he knocked on the door, heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. Elena answered, her eyes tired but guarded. She's in her room, she said, stepping aside. Mike nodded, no words exchanged. This wasn't about Elena anymore. Isabella sat on her bed, phone in hand, earbuds dangling. She looked up, her expression hesitant, and Mike's chest tightened. At 14, she was navigating a truth that had upended her world. Hey, kiddo, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Can we talk? She nodded, setting her phone down. Do you hate me? She asked, her voice small, eyes fixed on the floor. The question hit Mike like a rogue wave, stealing his breath. He stepped closer, kneeling to meet her gaze. Never, he said, his voice firm but soft. You're my daughter, Isabella. Always have been, always will be. Her eyes welled up, and she lunged forward, wrapping her arms around him. Mike held her tight, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. You'll never lose me, he whispered, the words of vow he'd never break. They talked for hours, first in her room, then over burgers at a nearby diner. Isabella shared her fears of being unwanted, of losing the only dad she'd ever known. Mike listened, his heart aching but resolute. He told her about the nights he'd rocked her to sleep as a baby, the letters she'd sent him on the rig, the pride he felt at her every milestone. Blood doesn't make a family, he said, dipping a fry in ketchup. Love does. She smiled, tentative but real, and Mike felt a spark of hope. Back at his apartment, Sophia was waiting, sprawled on the couch with a textbook. She'd been his rock, choosing him over Elena, but her anger toward her mother hadn't softened. How's Isabella? She asked, closing her book. She's hurting, but we're working on it, Mike said, grabbing a soda from the fridge. She'll come around. We all will. Sophia nodded, her expression softening. Mike saw a glimpse of the girl who used to beg for piggyback rides, and it fueled his determination to keep them together. Elena, meanwhile, faced the fallout alone. The community's whispers followed her, friends distanced themselves, invitations dried up. She sent Mike one last message, acknowledging her mistakes and promising to respect his boundaries. He didn't reply. Her consequences were hers to bear, and Mike was done carrying her weight. Carlos had left town for good, his shop sold, his name a footnote in Mike's life. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through truth. Mike took practical steps to rebuild. He enrolled Isabella in art classes, something she'd always loved, and attended every session, cheering her on as she sketched. He and Sophia started a weekly movie night, laughing over old comedies, slowly bridging the gap her teenage years had widened. Isabella began spending weekends at his apartment, her laughter filling the small space. One evening, she showed him a drawing, a family portrait, with Mike, Sophia, and herself under a bright Texas sky. This is us, she said, and Mike's throat tightened. He hung it on the fridge, a symbol of their new start. The construction job meant no more months away, no more missed moments. Mike was there for Sophia's school dance, snapping photos as she rolled her eyes, and for Isabella's first art show, clapping louder than anyone. He coached their soccer team, shouting encouragement from the sidelines, his voice hoarse by the final whistle. These were the moments he'd traded for years on the rig, and he'd never trade them again. One Sunday, Mike took the girls to the beach, the Gulf waves crashing gently. They built a sandcastle, Sophia teasing Isabella about her lopsided towers. As the sun set, Mike watched them, his heart full. The truth had torn his world apart. Elena's betrayal, Carlos's disloyalty, the revelation about Isabella's paternity. But it had also clarified what mattered. Family wasn't defined by DNA or a marriage certificate. It was in the laughter, the trust, the choice to show up. Mike knew the scars would linger. Sophia still struggled to forgive Elena, and Isabella sometimes grew quiet, wrestling with her identity. But they were healing, together. Elena had her own path, one Mike no longer walked. He'd fought for justice, exposed the lies, and protected his daughter's future. Now, he was fighting for something greater, a family rebuilt on love, not secrets. As the waves rolled in, Mike smiled, certain of one thing. He was exactly where he was meant to be.